The Badge of Justice, Chapter 1. Homecoming Sergeant Marcus Hayes had spent the last 10 years of his life in service to his country. He had enlisted in the Army, fresh out of high school, determined to make something of himself beyond the streets of Chicago, where he grew up. 2 tours in Afghanistan, numerous commendations, and years of service had shaped him into a man of discipline, courage, and resilience. But now, back on American soil, he was beginning to realize that some battles weren't fought overseas. After retiring from active duty, Marcus had taken a job as a federal officer with the Department of Veteran Affairs, helping fellow soldiers transition back into civilian life. It was work he was passionate about, ensuring that the men and women who had given everything for their country weren't left behind. This particular evening, he had just finished a long shift at the VA office in Jackson, Mississippi, and was heading home. The air was thick with the humidity of the deep South, a stark contrast to the dry heat of the desert he had once called home. Dressed in casual jeans and a simple t-shirt, he didn't particularly stand out except for the undeniable confidence in his stride. Stopping at a gas station on the outskirts of town, he pulled up to a pump, inserted his card, and began refueling his car. It was a quiet night until he heard the laughter. Chapter 2. The provocation. The laughter was sharp, mocking, and all too familiar. Marcus turned his head slightly, his trained instincts already assessing the situation. 3 teenage boys stood near the convenience store entrance, leaning against a truck. They looked no older than 17 or 18, dressed in ragged jeans and baseball caps, their faces full of arrogance. "Hey, boy," one of them called out, his voice dripping with condescension. Marcus exhaled slowly, reminding himself that not every battle was worth fighting. He turned back to his car, ignoring them. "Hey, I'm talking to you," another one taunted. "What's a boy like you doing around here?" Marcus clenched his jaw. He had heard it all before, the casual racism, the ignorant bravado. But it still stung. After all he had sacrificed, after all he had given for this country, he was still seen as nothing more than the color of his skin by some. He turned around, locking eyes with the boys. "Just getting gas," he said evenly. "Same as anyone else." The tallest of them, a wiry kid with a smirk that reeked of entitlement, stepped forward. "Didn't know they let your kind wear uniforms. Bet you think that makes you one of us?" Marcus remained calm, knowing these kids were looking for a reaction. But his silence only seemed to fuel their arrogance. "You think that uniform makes you special?" Another sneered. "Like you're better than us?" Chapter 3. The challenge. Marcus had encountered men like this before young, full of ignorance, emboldened by the idea that the world belonged to them. He could have walked away. He could have ignored them. But something inside him told him this was a lesson they needed to learn. He took a step forward, standing tall, his eyes unwavering. "I served my country," he said, his voice steady. "I fought for your right to stand there and run your mouths. I fought for your freedom, even if you don't deserve it." The smirks faltered slightly. "You don't know nothing about us," the tallest one snapped. "I know enough," Marcus countered. "I know that you've never had to fight for anything in your life. You've never had to watch your brothers bleed out in the sand. You've never had to hold a dying man's hand and promise him he'd make it home. You stand here, safe, because of men like me. And this," he gestured around them, "this is how you repay that?" The boys shifted uncomfortably, but their pride wouldn't let them back down. "You talk big," one of them muttered. "But you ain't nothing special." Marcus sighed. He reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for his wallet. He flipped it open, revealing his military ID and his federal officer badge. The moment the teens saw it, their faces drained of color. Chapter 4. The realization. "Wait, he's a Fed?" one of them whispered. Marcus let the badge speak for itself. He watched the realization dawn on them, This wasn't just some random black man they could intimidate. This was a decorated soldier, a federal officer, someone with real authority. The tallest one took an instinctive step back. "Shit," he muttered under his breath. Marcus took a step closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous calm. "You think you're tough? You think you're men? You're just scared little boys hiding behind ignorance. You don't know what real strength is. You don't know what real courage looks like." The boys were already retreating, their bravado crumbling. Without another word, they turned and hurried toward their truck, their laughter gone, their arrogance shattered. Marcus watched them go, shaking his head. He hadn't needed to throw a punch. He hadn't needed to raise his voice. The truth had been enough. Chapter 5. The reflection. As he slid back into his car, Marcus caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. He saw a man who had given everything for his country. A man who had faced the enemy on foreign soil and still had to fight battles at home. He thought about the boys, about the ignorance they carried. Maybe they would learn from this moment. Maybe they would grow. Maybe not. But Marcus knew one thing for sure: he wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just a black man. He was an American. And no one, no matter how ignorant, could take that away from him.